Hey everyone, Chris Carter here with Brian Batko on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Today I want to talk about the Steelers' options at finding another wide receiver to fill out this room. Is it better to trade for one or better to sign some of the available free agents? We'll talk about that and then go step by step through the Steelers' schedule, where the toughest games are, the easiest games are, where they could probably make a move to at least get back to where they were last year or improve if they're going to. All here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. We're your Steelers writers. And as always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Not only will they help you if you're injured in an accident, they'll also help you with your workers' compensation rights. Call them at 1-800-94-EDGAR. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. All right, Brian, let's talk about one of the big topics that the Steelers still haven't addressed, and that's wide receiver. After trading away George Pickens, the room in the wide receiver room was opened up. Now, we talked about this last week when Omar Khan spoke at rookie camp. He was kind of saying, we have confidence in the wide receiver room. Yeah, you also said that about having confidence in Kenny Pickett and all these other things. So let's be realistic about the Steelers' options at adding to this wide receiver room if they're going to before the season starts. And the question then becomes, do they get active in the trade market for a bigger name wide receiver, or do they take advantage of some of the wide receivers that are available in free agency? Notably available are Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, and Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis been taking a lot of visits though, so he might be on a shorter clock to be there. But I look at this and I think, one to factor in, signing free agents no longer counts against their free agent toll in 2026, so they don't have to worry about that. But giving up draft compensation for a receiver, unless you see that as like a long-term plan, it seems to go against the idea of they're trying to stack up the picks next year to move up to get a quarterback.
Well, the first kind of, I guess, notion that I want to shoot down a little bit is if the Steelers do, let's say, go out and trade for somebody or, make a big-ish signing, I don't want to hear, why didn't they just trade? Why didn't they just pay George Pickens then? That is not, that's not equivalent. The problems with George Pickens went far beyond what he can do on Sundays, from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and the plays that he can make on the field. Even if they get somebody else in here who is, not quite as talented or productive, that doesn't mean that was a 1-for-1 swap. No, the Pickens experiment, if you want to call it that, had reached its boiling point, and this is one time that you can take the Steelers at their word. It was time to move on. Everybody needed a fresh start there. George needed a fresh start. The Steelers needed a fresh start. Everybody. So even if that happens, that's kind of the first thing that I just wouldn't think would make sense. Like Chris Olave's name has been bandied about. And I've seen people, if they're going to trade for somebody like Chris Olave, why wouldn't they have just kept Pickens? Because he's not George Pickens. So that is where it starts. But my other kind of issue with the plan at receiver, wide receiver 2 evaluation, whatever you want to call it, from Omar Khan since he's been the GM here, is it just seems like they haven't done a great job finding the middle ground between the big swings like a Brandon Ayuk or, in this case, like if they were to trade for a Chris Olave or some other big name like that, which I don't think is particularly likely, but I guess you never know. The middle ground between those kind of moves that take a lot to happen, and there's a lot of moving parts, which we saw last summer with Ayuk, and the Robert Woodses, Allen Robinsons, Van Jeffersons of the world, in casting, or in my opinion, miscasting those guys as your number 2. That's where it seems like it breaks down a little bit for me. And do the Steelers go out and add somebody else? Yeah, I think it's possible. There are names out there, like you mentioned, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Gabe Davis, I guess another potential trade target is Allen Lazard if Aaron Rodgers is in the fold at some point. But, I do tend to think that signing Robert Woods right after the draft, like, he's not a no-name. I mean, that has to kind of mean something that the Steelers went out there and did that. So I'm not convinced that they are going to veer from what I just said there. And we might be in a similar situation to 2024 with regard to the depth, not necessarily the number one guy, because I do think DK Metcalf is better all-around player, better all-around person to have in the mix than George Pickens was as the number one receiver a year ago.
I think that's the thing here is they wanted a change in who is the number one guy, making sure that person is more of a team-oriented guy than George Pickens had been. But, also to your point, I also think the other thing factor in here is that, like, they might be in a position where they just want to see how these guys look at OTAs and see, like, how healthy is Roman Wilson, how much sharper do him and Calvin Austin look. And then if they get to a point where they're like, hey, you know what? This ain't it. Let's go sign one of those guys. Let's not force it while we don't have to. Like, it's also possible the Steelers are kicking tires right now. They're just calling around the league. Hey, you have this wide receiver that we know his contract's running out soon, and you guys aren't exactly in Super Bowl condition right now. What would it take to get this guy? And maybe that's all the call is, and like those teams are like, hey, either we're not interested or it would take this price. Let us know if you're interested. And the Steelers will be like, okay, cool, we'll do that. Maybe we may never do it. But there's so many of those conversations that happen all the time that aren't necessarily like, hey, actively exploring this possibility. It's more so like we're building up our research as far as what we understand, what different teams would want should the right scenario come into play in that situation. That is so much of the communications that happens between teams and front offices, and that's what leads to a lot of the rumor mill talk. Is when that happens, people are like, no, we weren't calling about that. We were just calling to see, like, hey, if this ever were to happen, what would this take?
Because Omar Khan is trying to thread a needle here with every move that he makes of helping the team in the immediate, but also, and probably more emphasis on this than ever, building it out for the future and making sure you have pieces in place for when let's say a rookie quarterback gets dropped in there next year or the year after that. I think that's ultimately their goal. And there are only so many trades and signings and draft picks you can make that serve both of those masters, so to speak. And, I think the DK Metcalf trade is exhibit A of that. I mean, that's locking up a guy who's already really good and is probably going to be really good for the length of this 5-year contract, and why you pay him big money. He's here to help win now, but he's also a part of the long-term vision. So I think that's what what Omar Khan is trying to do. And, that to me is the best way to explain what the Steelers are working on or up to at any position, wide receiver included. You can, I guess, argue with whether they're doing a good job of that. I mean, that's what all 32 teams are trying to do, is to do a good job building their roster. So it's competitive to try to do that against one another and get the best players 1 through 53. But I think that, if they go into the season with this receiving core, will it be the best that they could have for right now? No, obviously not. There are better players that you could plug in if you were pushing all your chips into the middle, but the Steelers aren't doing that. They are leaving at least a stack or 2 or 3 or 4, out of the pot right now so that they can try to bet bigger next season and beyond.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the schedule was released earlier this week, and I gave a brief reaction for a short for us, but I want to talk more in depth about that schedule and how the Steelers look into the matchups through the different parts of the season. That'll be the next couple segments here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. They also help out with workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, do you know who decides when you're better and who decides when your treatment's over and who decides when your benefits are over? The answer to all those questions are the insurance company's doctors. They probably won't be on your side. You know who will be on your side? Edgar Snyder Associates. You can call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR because they'll fight for you the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. Again, that's 1-800-94-EDGAR for Edgar Snyder Associates. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's talk about the Steelers' schedule as it was released. The Steelers do get a Week 5 bye very early in the season. For that, we knew about the Week 4 game being Ireland against the Vikings. But looking at this schedule, we're going to go through this in different stages. We're going to handle the first half of the schedule in this segment. We'll deal with the second half in the next segment. But in the first half of the season, where they got eight games in 9 weeks before they get into that next stretch in November, they've got 4 home games, an international game, and 3 away games. They start off on the road at the Jets Sunday, 1 p.m., potential double revenge game, Justin Fields and Aaron Rodgers. DK Metcalf gets his revenge game in Week 2, 1 p.m. at home. The Steelers take on the Seahawks on September 14th. Then the next week, they go on the road to play the Patriots, 1 p.m.
Robert Spillane gets his revenge game.
Robert Spillane revenge game. There's quite a few of those. Then they play the Vikings, who Javon Hargrave, who knows what number revenge game this is for him for the Steelers. Yeah. It's been so long, but he's
fared pretty well, as I recall.
Yeah. But that's Week 4 in Ireland. They play the Vikings. They get a Week 5 bye week. Then they after the bye week, they get to play the Browns at home. And then they get to play the Bengals on the road on the short week, the dreaded short week divisional game on the road against the Bengals October 16th on a Thursday. Then they get the Packers at home for Sunday Night Football on October 26th. And then they start off November against the Colts at home, a team that they haven't beaten since Shane Steichen took over as head coach. Granted, both of those games on the road. When you look at this schedule, one thing that pokes out to me about this early part, Brian, is a lot of new quarterbacks. Justin Fields, new to the team. Sam Darnold, new to the team. Drake May, second-year quarterback. J.J. McCarthy, second-year quarterback who didn't play his first year. Browns, whether it's Kenny Pickett, Shador Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, unless it's Joe Flacco, it's a new quarterback there. So in their first 5 games, they could be facing new quarterbacks in each of those games, and an opportunity for the Steelers to try to catch them while those teams are figuring things out.
Yeah, I mean, Drake May is going to be there for the Patriots, but new coach there with, Mike Vrabel. Mm-hmm. And there is going to be a lot of new for opposing teams, but there's going to be a new quarterback for the Steelers too. So that's very a double-edged sword. I think it generally is good to Mike Tomlin's record facing new head coaches for the first time has not been good in recent years, but this is going to be Aaron Glenn's first regular season game as an NFL head coach. So I think that has to be advantage to the longest tenured coach in the NFL. I don't think Glenn is going to reinvent the wheel or anything like that, or have new, also first time being an NFL offensive coordinator for Tanner Engstrand, who came over from the Lions and will be working with Justin Fields. So you got to think the Jets could come out pretty disjointed there at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford. I think that's a really nice way for the Steelers to begin. And beyond that, I mean, the Seahawks are going to be breaking in. Sam Darnold, the Patriots, again, they've got I consider them a little bit more stable because Vrabel has been there. I mean, he's done it at the NFL level as a head coach with the Titans. He's played and coached with the Patriots. So that they're a team that should be building and sort of ready to roll by Week 3. And then the Vikings, I don't know what to expect from J.J. McCarthy. On one hand, I think, first 4 weeks of his NFL career are going to have a lot of ups and probably more downs. But Kevin O'Connell, he is a quarterback whisperer, and he always seems to have the right plans for who's ever under center, whether it's Kirk Cousins or Sam Darnold, or in this case, a second-year guy who hasn't played a real snap yet.
Yeah, I think that's part of this, right? Is just there's also the uncertainty because, a couple of years back when they played the Texans, CJ Stroud ripped them apart. We talked about new coaches. Shane Steichen has just been a nightmare for the Steelers to play in those years. So maybe it's not now. Mike Tomlin has a great track record against Mike Vrabel. In fact, he's never lost against Mike Vrabel. But he's also has not beaten the Patriots since Tom Brady's left, which is kind of astonishing when you think about that. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that could play into these early games. But to me, the biggest thing is this: if the Steelers want to be a team that hits the ground running, the opportunity is there. Like if they come out and they're saying, hey, we're less concerned about how good our quarterback is early in the season, and more concerned about, are we that physical team that we want to be? Are we stuffing the run? Are we running the football? They do those things that can carry you through those games, because none of those teams, in my opinion, are Super Bowl threats this year. They're all either figuring it out rebuilding, or like kind of like the Steelers, like trying to figure out how they're going to fight their way to the playoffs. So that could be a time to get things right early. And then when you get to the Packers games, those be the games where if you started hot, those be the games that you can build off and say, okay, now we're back where we were last year, where again, the Steelers were in a great spot last year when they were 10-3. they set everything up so that they could have the pitfall and still make the playoffs. But ideally, you'd like to avoid that pitfall.
Yeah, but it is a similar, at least on paper, I say this every year, these matchups can change a lot by the time they get played. I always use as an example 2 years ago, the Bengals, both in the second half of the season. Oh, this is scary to play Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase twice. It ended up being Jake Browning. So it was not the same type of daunting, matchups that you thought it would be. But yeah, I mean, certainly when you look on paper on May 16th, it's not ideal, I suppose, to be road warriors the first month of the season. And I think it's going to be particularly grueling to get back from Boston and then, fly out to Dublin, 2 to 3 days later, depending on when the Steelers decide they want to go. It sounds like they're going to leave later in the week again, like they did in 2013, but that's tough to adjust your body once you're over there. So there's nothing really about that trip that's easy, except for probably having a lot of Steelers fans at Croke Park in Dublin, making it a great home atmosphere for you. But if you're going to have all that travel in the first 4 weeks of your calendar, at least you do face some teams that, well, let's just look later. They aren't the Bills. They aren't the Ravens. They aren't the Lions. So, that there's always something you can always find something to complain about in your NFL team's schedule. Mm-hmm. You really can. So, now, everybody's got issues. Everybody's got to travel. Everybody's got to play divisional winners. That's just how it goes.
Yeah. I mean, like the Ravens have one of the toughest schedules in the NFL because they keep winning the division, and and this year it just so happens not only do they play the AFC North, which is always a tough division, they're playing the NFC North, which all the teams in the AFC North have to do. But it's like you get that, and then you also get the Chiefs and the Bills and everyone else. Well, I guess everyone's getting those because they're playing the AFC East as well. But
the Steelers they only leave the Eastern Time Zone twice Ireland, right? So
yeah. They get some benefits there, and I think that's part of what the Steelers are get the benefit. But but like you said, like the schedule's the schedule. It's basically programmed at this point. It's not. This isn't like the college football gods that will just schedule the most random things, and you're like, wait, what? How did that happen? And you're but everything, there's a system and a reason why these teams get aligned with other teams throughout those times. So like I'm right with you. I think that's that's something there. The other thing that I'm looking at in the first half of the schedule that could be a problem is that coming off the bye, they play the Browns, not that game in particular, but you get that divisional game and then the short divisional game against against the Bengals on the road on Thursday Night Football. That's something the Steelers have not been able to win. They have not been able to win one of those games under Mike Tomlin. Granted, most teams don't fare well in such a situation.
Yeah, and the Bengals have had their number by and large for the most part when Joe Burrow plays. Obviously, they got them down in Cincinnati last season, the last couple seasons, I guess, right? Russell Wilson and Kenny Pickett picked apart that Bengals defense, which on one hand you think they can't be any worse, and yet with the Trey Hendrickson drama, I mean, the Bengals are just like a perennial bad vibes factory, which is really remarkable considering the amount of talent that they've amassed. Particularly in the passing game with Burrow, Chase, Higgins. It seems like every time they take 3 steps forward, they're still taking a step or 2 back with the way they run their organization. So, we'll see if that's holding them back. But yeah, Chris, you're right. It'll be a challenge to turn around quickly. At least it's a short trip down to Cincinnati. And again, though, I mean, every team has those obstacles. I think the Browns, when they play the Steelers, are going to be coming off of a London trip, right, against the Vikings. So, they didn't get an off week after their trip abroad. I've seen some people saying, well, could the Steelers have just had no choice with when they get their bye because they're going overseas? That's not the case. Some teams play the week after they play overseas. It's just, again, it's random. It's NFL schedule makers trying to make it fair and equitable for everybody. I don't want there to be this. I think it's not true that the Steelers, had to have a bye. after going to Dublin. That's just not. There's so many international games anymore that the
Yeah.
NFL can't afford to do that for teams. You can't be having a week 2 bye and all of that. So yeah, that's just how it shook out for them, and they need to make good use of having that early bye. But I mean, that's easier said than done because you never know when injuries are going to hit. You never know when you're going to be facing teams that are hot or cold. You just got to play good football over the balance of your schedule and not get off to terrible starts, not have the wheels fall off late in the season. But as you look at it now, that could very well happen again in 2025. And I assume we're going to broach that possibility here in the third segment, Chris.
Yeah, you will do that in the third segment. Some quick research. I did some digging last year. Of the 9 teams that went international, only one of them got a bye week the week after their international.
Yeah, I think the Jets played like Monday night the next week, which makes sense. You
Yeah.
get an extra day of rest. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that the teams can work around that. It's not like 2013 where it's so novel to go overseas and then have to come back to the States and play again a week later.
Indeed. Let's go over the second half of the schedule next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. But first, we'll remind you the show is brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. If you're looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind, step into something more than just a workout. Whether you can welcome the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training; it's about living the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by third-degree black belt that builds confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn about the exclusive 3-month introductory package today at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's go over the second half of the schedule here, running through the games. 9 straight weeks of football to end the season. In Week 10, they played the Chargers in Los Angeles for Sunday Night Football on November 9th. Week 11, back home against the Bengals, 1 p.m. kickoff on November 16th. Then they get another 1 p.m. kickoff, this time in Chicago, and on November 23rd, back home for their only their only home 425 game of the season. That's the Bills on November 30th. On the road, 1 p.m. against the Ravens the week after that. In Week 14, Week 15, back home for Monday Night Football against the Dolphins on December 15th. Then on the road against the Lions on December 21st for a 425 kickoff. Again, then on the road again against the Browns at 1 p.m. kickoff on December 28th. And then Week 18 with the, of course, to be determined time because it's Week 18 at home against the Ravens, setting up for another finale where either A, the whole division will be on the line, or B, the Ravens will be resting all their starters and the Steelers will be going up against the newest Snoop Huntley. So looking at that,
Cooper Rush now this year.
Oh gosh, I didn't even think about that Cooper Rush. But Brian, looking at that, this looks like a potentially another gauntlet for the end of the season. Granted, not 4 straight opponents that are just like Super Bowl juggernauts, but 4 out of your last 6 games, Bills, 2 Ravens, and the Lions. Those are some tough matchups, and especially getting the Ravens twice in that span, the team that ran you over so much that impacted your draft plans this year.
And I'm also not discounting the potential of the Bears humming at that point in the season with Ben Johnson as a first-time head coach. But if he gets, I mean, they've got a lot of nice pieces personnel-wise around Caleb Williams. If he can get that all to mesh by the time you get to Thanksgiving week, I think out there in Chicago or close to it, that is not going to be an easy game. That I know we sometimes bring up, like you brought up that the Steelers haven't beaten the Patriots since Tom Brady left there. Now, granted, those matchups were against Bill Belichick. They didn't see Gerard Mayo last year, right? So, I mean, that there's still real factors with that. What's more mystical is the Steelers' struggles against the Bears, especially in Chicago. Now, like I hesitate to really draw through lines there because, especially with that franchise, coaches, coordinators are changing all the time, GMs. But there is just something in the water there, it seems, when the Steelers go. I just don't think that's going to be an easy game by any stretch if Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson put it together. But yeah, and then that Bills-Ravens back-to-back stretch that's arguably the 2 best teams in the AFC and 2 teams that have really dismantled the Steelers, most of the times that they've played them when there's a lot on the line. So I think you have to love facing Miami in December. That's just kind of a tenet of NFL football.
They have not been good in that time.
Regardless of who their head coach or quarterback is, you want a team built for South Beach coming to Pittsburgh December 15th. No doubt about that. And then going to Detroit late in the year, that could be a game where the Lions maybe can lock up their own division in week 16. And I do tend to think, Chris, that there's Brownie the Elf magic, blood magic that gets on the Steelers when they go to Cleveland. So just as we sit here today, I don't have a great feeling about that game. If you told me
the last time they swept the Browns,
it's been a while, right?
2017.
Yeah. But here's what I was going to say, though. Like, if you also told me that this Browns team is going to be historically bad, that also wouldn't surprise me. So I could see that one going either way. I could see the Steelers sweeping them with relative ease this year and everyone else in the division sweeping them with relative ease, or I could see yet another miserable trip to Cleveland. And I do tend to think I'm pretty high on the Ravens. I usually am, as long as number 8 is their quarterback. I think they could be resting starters in that regular season finale in Pittsburgh. I really do.
So we talk about the juggernauts there. Just before those juggernauts are those teams that are looking to be juggernauts soon. The Chargers with Justin Herbert, the Bengals with Joe Burrow. Are you high on the Bengals this year, despite their lack of additions on defense and on the offensive line? Yes, they drafted Shamar Stewart, but it looks like Trey Hendrickson's going to be headed out of town. That does not look like a positive situation for them right now. And essentially, they took the leading sack man. They're going to be replacing him with a rookie. And they haven't done much else to bolster the defense, haven't done much else to bolster the offensive line. And to me, those are the biggest weaknesses on the team that have held them back.
Shamar Stewart, did he sign his rookie deal yet? Is he good to go? I mean, even he was not out there at rookie minicamp. Again, just always a bad vibes factory in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. Even when the vibes should be good. They can't seem to get out of their own way. I mean, I think their defense is going to be at least a little bit better. I mean, they were just historically bad last season. And you're right. I mean, there aren't any additions that make you think, okay, they don't really have much money to invest and make additions on that side of the ball because of everything that they're paying their big three. But I still think that they are going to be a particularly difficult matchup for the Steelers more often than not because of what they can do through the air. They are so strong that way. And the Steelers secondary, I mean, it fell apart a little bit at the end of last season, and they've still got some question marks to answer there for sure. The Chargers, Chris, are a team that I really believe in. I've been duped by the Chargers before in the Brandon Staley era, if you want to call it that. It is now the Jim Harbaugh era out in LA. They got Najee Harris, they got Omari on Hampton, they got Mike Williams.
Really nice O-line.
Yeah, really nice O-line. I think they could be one of the best teams in the AFC. I really do. And I think I don't think I'm going to predict the Steelers to go out west and win that game.
You know, it's funny because I've had this old tenet my entire life. When I was a kid, every year it was the Chargers year. I just remember like I'd pick up Street and Smiths or Athlon and start reading their preseason magazines, and every NFL predictor would say it's the Chargers year. LaDainian Thomas, Drew Brees, and then it was Philip Rivers, and then it was Antonio Gates, and it's like every year they were going to be the team that finally did, and they never did. And so I was like, don't ever sell me on the Chargers again. And even when they drafted Justin Herbert, I've been on the train. But what I saw with Jim Harbaugh last year, I do think there's potential for that to happen.
They might finally get it right. They might finally have the right yin and yang of talent acquisition and culture there. That's we haven't gotten into predictions. It's only mid-May, but I think I'm going to be predicting the Chargers to win a lot of games this season.
I would say they are my dark horse to actually be a division winner and finally break the streak of the Chiefs there. So like we're saying, that back end of the schedule, not an easy one for the Steelers. They need to load up those early wins here. We're not going to do the whole thing where we predict wins.
They're probably still going to have Chargers fans outnumbered at SoFi Stadium, but as far as what's actually on the field, I think that is going to be a difficult matchup for the Steelers.
that is, we will continue with the look into things for the Steelers next week. The OTAs is just 2 weeks away, where we'll be on hand to check out all the Steelers veterans who are reporting. We'll see. Who knows? Aaron Rodgers, will he report by then? We will keep you up to date with all those things here. From the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko, thanks again for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast. Remember, we're on every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We also have daily content from all of our sports writers like Chip Hammond Football that Brian Batko does every Tuesday. And you can get that on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of that content every day in your feed. Back here Monday for the next episode of the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.